Beneath the rolling hills and ancient castles of Wales lies a secret not carved in stone, but written in blood. A secret older than the legends of King Arthur, older even than Stonehenge. It's hidden in the DNA of the Welsh people, a genetic code that whispers the story of Britain's first inhabitants. Long before the Romans marched, before the Celts carved their identity into the land, there were people whose legacy has survived not through monuments, but through the very fabric of their descendants. Recent genetic discoveries have turned history on its head. Scientists have found that the Welsh carry DNA so ancient, it stretches back over 9,000 years, making them the closest living relatives to the first humans who settled in Britain after the last ice age. This isn't just a story of ancestry. It's a window into a forgotten world, preserved in the bloodlines of modern Wales. Imagine the landscape of ancient Britain, a wild, untamed frontier emerging from the grip of glacier. As the ice retreated, small groups of hunter-gatherers ventured across new land bridges, carving out lives along the rugged cliffs and dense forests. Some of these pioneers settled in what we now call Wales, their descendants remaining there for millennia, their genetic code unchanged while the world around them transformed. While the rest of Britain became a crossroads of invading armies, Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Wales remained a stronghold. Its natural barriers, the jagged mountains and deep valleys, weren't just obstacles to conquerors. They were guardians of an ancient genetic legacy. This isolation allowed the Welsh to preserve DNA that tells a story no history book can fully capture, a story of survival, resilience, and identity that predates the very idea of Britain. But the story of Welsh DNA doesn't just challenge what we thought we knew about British history, it rewrites it. The Welsh aren't simply descendants of Celtic tribes, they are living relics of a time long before Celtic culture even existed. Their genetic makeup reveals connections not just across the British Isles, but stretching as far as the Basque region of northern Spain, hinting at migrations and mysteries lost to time. This is more than an untold story. It's a forgotten chapter of human history, hidden in plain sight. And today, we're going to uncover it. Picture a world frozen in time, literally. Around 11,000 years ago, Britain was emerging from the grip of the last ice age. Vast sheets of ice that had once covered the land were retreating, revealing a wild, untamed landscape of dense forests, sweeping plains, and towering mountains. This was a new frontier, raw and untouched, waiting to be explored. Into this rugged wilderness came the first humans, small bands of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, following herds of animals and searching for fertile ground. Among them were the ancestors of the Welsh, whose footsteps would mark the beginning of a genetic legacy that still survives today. These early settlers crossed what was then a land bridge connecting Britain to mainland Europe, a stretch of land known as Doggerland. As they moved westward, some found refuge in the natural fortress of Wales, a land carved by mountains, rivers, and valleys. This wasn't just a place to survive, it became a place to thrive. The isolation provided by the harsh, rugged terrain helped protect these early communities from the waves of migrations and invasions that would later sweep across the British Isles. Modern genetic research has uncovered something remarkable about these first settlers. Their DNA lives on, not as distant echoes but as a vivid thread woven into the genetic fabric of the Welsh people today. Studies have shown that the Welsh carry some of the oldest genetic markers in Britain, with direct links to these post-Ice Age pioneers. While the rest of the British Isles saw their ancient DNA diluted by successive migrations, from Neolithic farmers to Roman legions, the Welsh gene pool remained largely undisturbed, preserved by both geography and cultural resilience. This ancient lineage isn't just a scientific curiosity, it's a living connection to the distant past. Imagine walking the hills of Wales, knowing that the people you pass on the street carry the same genetic code as those early hunter-gatherers who once roamed the same landscapes. Their survival through thousands of years of change, conflict, and conquest is a testament to the enduring spirit of the Welsh people. But this story is only the beginning. As we dig deeper into the genetic history of Wales, we'll uncover how other ancient migrations laid new threads onto this timeless tapestry, shaping the unique identity that the Welsh carry to this day. Around 6,000 years ago, a revolution swept across Britain, not with swords or armies, but with seeds. The Neolithic Revolution marked the arrival of farming, a transformation that changed human life forever. People no longer relied solely on hunting and gathering. They began cultivating crops, domesticating animals, and building permanent settlements. This shift wasn't just cultural, it came with new people, new technologies, and new genes. Migrating from Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, these early farmers carried not only agricultural knowledge but also distinct genetic markers that spread across Europe and into Britain. As these Neolithic farmers made their way through the British Isles, they left a profound genetic footprint, blending with or replacing local hunter-gatherer populations. But in Wales, something unusual happened. The rugged, mountainous landscape acted as both a barrier and a refuge. While much of Britain experienced a significant genetic shift due to these farming communities, Wales remained somewhat insulated. The Neolithic influence was present, but not dominant. The genetic legacy of the original Mesolithic hunter-gatherers remained remarkably intact, woven alongside, but not overshadowed by, the DNA of these new settlers. Recent genetic studies reveal that the Welsh retained a higher proportion of hunter-gatherer ancestry compared to other parts of Britain. This wasn't just because of geography, though that played a crucial role. The challenging terrain of Wales made large-scale farming more difficult, limiting the spread of agricultural communities and the genetic influence that came with them. While fertile plains in England and Scotland quickly adapted to Neolithic practices, the steep hills and isolated valleys of Wales preserved older ways of life, and the genes of those who lived them. But the story doesn't end with isolation. There was interaction, trade, and some intermarriage between the native populations and the Neolithic newcomers. This blending introduced new genetic traits to the Welsh gene pool, though not to the extent seen in other regions. In fact, this delicate balance between preservation and adaptation is part of what makes Welsh DNA so unique today, a rare genetic window into Britain's distant past. This chapter of the Welsh genetic story reminds us that history isn't always written in battles and conquests. Sometimes, it's etched in the slow, steady rhythms of daily life, in the planting of crops, the raising of families, and the quiet endurance of communities nestled in the hills. And in Wales, those ancient rhythms still echo, not just in the landscape, but in the very DNA of its people. Around 4,500 years ago, a new wave of people swept across Europe, bringing with them advanced technologies, distinctive cultural artifacts, and a genetic legacy that would transform the British Isles. They were known as the Beaker people, named after their unique bell-shaped pottery, often found in ancient burial sites. But these were more than just skilled craftsmen. They were agents of one of the most significant genetic shifts in Britain's history. In many parts of the British Isles, the arrival of the Beaker people led to an almost complete replacement of the local gene pool, with up to 90% of the population's DNA being overwritten by this new lineage. Yet, in Wales, the story took a different turn. The Beaker people originated from the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal, and spread rapidly across Western Europe, reaching Britain around 2400 BC. They introduced not only metalworking skills, particularly in copper and bronze, but also new burial practices, social structures, and, most crucially, a distinct genetic signature. Their DNA showed connections to steppe populations from regions that are now part of Ukraine and Russia, suggesting a complex web of migrations and interactions long before they reached British shores. But Wales, with its formidable natural defenses of rugged mountains and isolated valleys, resisted the full force of this genetic tsunami. While the Beaker culture left its mark, the genetic impact was less dramatic compared to regions like England. In Wales, the Beaker-associated genetic contribution is estimated to be between 25% and 40%, significant, but not overwhelming. This means that, unlike much of Britain where the ancient hunter-gatherer and Neolithic farmer genes were largely replaced, in Wales, they survived, layered beneath the new genetic influences like ancient roots intertwined with fresh growth. This blending of populations led to fascinating genetic diversity. The Beaker people likely introduced lighter skin tones, blue and green eyes, and taller, more robust physiques to the Welsh gene pool. Yet, the darker features often associated with ancient Welsh ancestry, olive skin, dark hair, deep-set eyes, remain prominent, a living testament to the resilience of the older genetic layers. It's this unique combination that gives many Welsh people their striking, diverse appearance today. The Beaker migration also challenges the simplistic narratives of ancient history. It wasn't just a story of invaders replacing locals, it was one of cultural exchange, adaptation, and coexistence. In Wales, this meant that while new ideas and genes arrived, They didn't erase what was already there. Instead, they added complexity to an already rich tapestry, one that continues to define Welsh identity to this day. When most people think of Welsh heritage, they immediately picture the Celts, warriors adorned with intricate patterns, speaking melodic languages, and weaving rich myths that echo through time. But while Celtic culture is deeply embedded in Wales' identity, the genetic story reveals something far more complex. The Celts were not the beginning of the Welsh story. They were another chapter in a much older book. Their influence shaped language, art, and traditions. But when it comes to DNA, the picture is layered with surprises. The Celts began migrating to Britain around 1000 BC, spreading from Central Europe into the British Isles. Unlike the dramatic genetic upheavals caused by earlier migrations, the Celts didn't replace populations, they integrated with them. In Wales, their arrival added new cultural dimensions but did not significantly alter the deep genetic foundations already in place. The ancient DNA of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and beaker people remained intact, forming the core of the Welsh gene pool. This is why, despite being celebrated as a Celtic nation, the Welsh carry genetic markers that predate the Celts by thousands of years. One of the most prominent genetic signatures linked to Celtic ancestry is a Y chromosome marker known as R1BL21. This marker is found in over 70% of Welsh men, one of the highest concentrations in the world. It's a powerful reminder of the Celtic influence, especially among male lineages, reflecting the spread of tribes and their patriarchal structures. But even this marker tells only part of the story. It doesn't erase the older genetic layers. It sits atop them, like a new design painted over an ancient mural. The Celts left a stronger cultural than genetic footprint. They introduced the Brythonic language, from which modern Welsh evolved, and shaped the social and spiritual fabric of early Wales. Their legends, symbols, and artistic styles became intertwined with the land itself. Yet, beneath these cultural markers, the DNA tells a story of continuity rather than conquest. The Welsh are not simply Celts, they are descendants of people who lived on this land long before the Celts arrived, carrying the genetic echoes of the first Britons. This blending of ancient and Celtic identities is what makes Welsh heritage so unique. It's not defined by a single migration or moment in history, but by layers of influence, each adding depth without erasing what came before. The Celtic connection is an essential part of the Welsh story, but the DNA reveals something even more profound. The roots of Welsh identity stretch far deeper, into the very dawn of Britain's human history. Wales is often described as rugged, wild, and untamed, a land of towering mountains, deep valleys, and dramatic coastlines. But beyond its breathtaking beauty, this landscape has played an unexpected role in shaping something far more profound: the genetic identity of its people. The harsh, isolated terrain of Wales didn't just define its geography. It acted as a natural shield, preserving a genetic legacy that has survived for thousands of years, untouched by the waves of invasions that transformed the rest of Britain. After the Roman Empire withdrew from Britain around the 5th century AD, the island was thrown into chaos. The Anglo-Saxons poured into what is now England, reshaping its culture, language, and genetics. Later, the Vikings sailed in from Scandinavia, leaving a strong genetic imprint in Scotland, Ireland, and parts of England. The Normans followed, bringing their influence from northern France. Each wave of newcomers left a mark, except in Wales. Why? The answer lies in the landscape. The towering mountains and rugged coastline of Wales created natural barriers that made large-scale invasions difficult. While the Romans did conquer parts of Wales, their influence faded quickly once their legions left. The Anglo-Saxons, who dominated England, barely touched Wales, and even the Vikings, known for their far-reaching raids, left only a faint trace of their DNA, accounting for just 1 to 3% of the Welsh genetic pool, mostly in coastal areas like Anglesey. This isolation wasn't just physical, it was cultural, too. The Welsh language, one of the oldest living languages in Europe, remained strong, reinforcing a sense of identity and continuity. Families lived in the same valleys for generations, marrying within close-knit communities. This limited gene flow from outside populations, allowing ancient genetic markers to survive, almost frozen in time. Genetic studies have confirmed that the Welsh carry some of the oldest DNA in Britain, with direct links to post-Ice Age hunter-gatherers and early Neolithic farmers. While much of Britain's ancient DNA was diluted by successive waves of migration, Wales retained a unique genetic signature, an unbroken thread stretching back thousands of years. But this isn't just a story of isolation. It's a story of survival. The people of Wales didn't just endure the passing of time. They thrived, maintaining a distinct identity despite the powerful forces that changed the world around them. Their DNA is a testament to resilience, a living archive of Britain's earliest inhabitants, preserved by the very mountains that rise above the land. When we think of Wales, we often imagine it as a small, united country with a shared language, culture, and history. But beneath the surface, the DNA tells a different story, one of division, shaped by time, geography, and ancient migrations. Surprisingly, people from North Wales and South Wales are genetically distinct from each other, as different as populations separated by entire countries. In fact, the genetic gap between North and South Wales is as significant as the difference between northern and southern England. But how did this divide come to be? The answer lies in the rugged landscapes and historical boundaries that have shaped Wales for thousands of years. The towering mountains of Snowdonia, the Cambrian Range, and the deep river valleys created natural barriers that limited movement and interaction between the north and the south. For ancient communities, these weren't just scenic landscapes, they were formidable obstacles, isolating groups of people for generations. This isolation allowed unique genetic patterns to develop and persist within each region. Historical kingdoms also played a role. In the north, the ancient kingdom of Gwynedd stood as a stronghold, fiercely independent and resistant to outside influence. To the south, Dyfed and other kingdoms had different connections, particularly with trading routes that reached across the sea to Ireland and continental Europe. These separate political entities fostered distinct communities, with limited intermarriage and cultural exchange between regions. Over time, this separation became etched into the very DNA of the Welsh people. Genetic studies, like the groundbreaking People of the British Isles project, revealed just how deep this division runs. North Walians often show genetic similarities to the Irish, reflecting ancient migrations across the Irish Sea. In contrast, people from South Wales have subtle genetic ties to populations from Brittany and even parts of France, hinting at historical connections along the Atlantic coast. But this isn't just a story of difference. It's also a story of shared heritage. Despite the genetic distinctions, both regions carry the ancient DNA of Britain's earliest inhabitants, hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and the resilient bloodlines that survived the Ice Age. The differences tell us about the journeys people took, the alliances they formed, and the barriers, both natural and cultural, that shaped their world. Today, you can still feel this divide in subtle ways, through dialects, traditions, and even family names that trace back to specific regions. But whether from the rugged peaks of Snowdonia or the rolling hills of the south, the people of Wales share a connection that goes beyond borders. Their DNA is a map of ancient history, written in the language of survival, adaptation, and resilience. Hidden within the DNA of the Welsh people is a connection so ancient, it predates the Celts, the Romans, and even the first written word. This connection stretches over 1,000 miles, linking the rugged mountains of Wales to the misty valleys of the Basque country, nestled between northern Spain and southern France. At first glance, the Welsh and the Basques might seem worlds apart, different languages, different cultures, different histories. But beneath the surface, their genes tell a story of shared origins, one that reaches back to the very dawn of European civilization. Modern genetic research has uncovered something remarkable. The Welsh and the Basques share strikingly similar genetic markers, suggesting a common ancestry that dates back to the time when Europe was emerging from the grip of the last ice age. Around 15,000 to 7,500 years ago, long before the rise of farming, small bands of hunter-gatherers roamed the landscapes of Ice Age Europe. As the glacier retreated, some of these groups migrated north, following the newly exposed land into what we now call Britain. Others stayed behind, settling in the mountainous regions of the Basque country. This ancient migration left a lasting legacy. Studies, including the groundbreaking work of Professor Stephen Oppenheimer, show that up to 81% of Welsh DNA can be traced back to these early hunter-gatherer populations, the same genetic pool that defines the Basque people today. Unlike many European regions that experienced waves of genetic change through invasions and migrations, both Wales and the Basque country remained relatively isolated, acting as genetic time capsules that preserved the DNA of Europe's earliest inhabitants. The connection goes beyond genetics. Linguists have long been fascinated by the structural similarities between the Basque language, Euskara, one of the oldest living languages in Europe, and the ancient Celtic languages, including Welsh. While there's no direct linguistic link, the shared patterns hint at deep, prehistoric interactions long before recorded history began. Interestingly, this genetic link helps debunk some of the popular myths surrounding the Welsh. For generations, people have speculated about the origins of the so-called dark Welsh, individuals with olive skin, dark hair, and striking dark eyes. Folklore often blamed shipwrecked Spanish sailors from the Spanish Armada or mysterious Mediterranean ancestors. But the truth is even more fascinating. These features aren't exotic imports. They are echoes of an ancient past, inherited from ancestors who lived thousands of years before the first Spanish ship ever sailed. The Basque connection is more than just a genetic curiosity. It's a reminder that the story of Wales isn't confined to its borders. The Welsh people are part of a much larger, older story, one that connects them to the first Europeans who walked these lands after the Ice Age, to the survival of cultures long before nations existed, and to a shared heritage that stretches across mountains, seas, and millennia. For centuries, the story of Welsh identity has been woven with legends, folklore, and assumptions passed down through generations. But as science advances, especially in the field of genetics, many of these long-held beliefs are being challenged, reshaped, and in some cases, completely debunked. The DNA of the Welsh people reveals a story far more fascinating, and far older, than the myths suggest. It's a story rooted not in romanticized tales but in hard, biological evidence that connects the modern Welsh to the very first people who set foot on British soil. One of the most persistent myths is that the Welsh are purely Celtic, descended directly from the ancient tribes that spread across Europe around 1000 BC. While the Celtic influence on language, culture, and traditions is undeniable, the genetic reality tells a different story. The truth is, the Welsh were here long before the Celts arrived. Their DNA carries markers that predate the Celtic migrations by thousands of years, linking them to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who settled in Britain after the last Ice Age. The Celts left a strong cultural legacy, but genetically, they were just one chapter in the much older book of Welsh ancestry. Another common misconception revolves around the dark Welsh theory, the idea that people with olive skin, dark hair, and striking dark eyes must be descended from Spanish sailors, perhaps survivors of the shipwrecked Spanish Armada in the 16th century. It's a story that's been told and retold in Welsh families for generations, adding a touch of mystery and romance to family trees. But genetic evidence tells a different tale. These features aren't the result of a few lost sailors. They are the echoes of ancient migrations that occurred thousands of years ago. The dark features many Welsh people carry today are linked to their deep genetic connection with the Basques of northern Spain, a bond that dates back to the Stone Age, not the 1500s. Then there's the belief that the Welsh have always been isolated, genetically untouched by outside influences. While it's true that Wales' rugged mountains and valleys created natural barriers, this doesn't mean the Welsh lived in complete isolation. There were migrations, cultural exchanges, and limited genetic mixing with Romans, Anglo-Saxons, and even Vikings. However, these interactions were far less significant in Wales compared to other parts of Britain. The key takeaway isn't that the Welsh were isolated from the world, it's that their ancient genetic legacy remained resilient, even as new influences arrived. Genetic studies have also dismantled the idea that the Welsh are closely related to the Cornish simply because of their similar languages. While both Welsh and Cornish belong to the Celtic language family, the DNA tells a different story. The Cornish show more genetic similarities to the English due to greater Anglo-Saxon influence, while the Welsh retained much older genetic markers. This highlights how language and genetics don't always follow the same path. Cultures can spread and evolve in ways that don't necessarily align with population genetics. In the end, the truth is more compelling than the myths. The Welsh are not defined by any single migration, invasion, or legend. Their identity is the product of resilience, a genetic tapestry woven from threads that stretch back to the very beginning of human settlement in Britain. It's a story written in blood, bone, and DNA, revealing that the true history of Wales is even richer, older, and more extraordinary than folklore could ever imagine. Wales is often celebrated for its breathtaking landscapes, rich culture, and ancient language. But what many don't realize is that its greatest legacy isn't carved into stone or sung in ballads. It's living within the people themselves. The DNA of the Welsh isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living, breathing testament to resilience, survival, and continuity. Despite the countless changes that have shaped Britain over thousands of years, the genetic story of Wales remains remarkably intact, a bridge between the ancient world and the present day. In the modern era, Wales has seen waves of migration, industrialization, and cultural shifts. The Industrial Revolution transformed Welsh towns and cities, drawing workers from across Britain and beyond. This brought new bloodlines into the mix, from English labourers to Irish immigrants seeking work in the booming coal and steel industries. In the 20th and 21st centuries, globalization introduced even more diversity, as people from around the world made Wales their home. Yet, despite these changes, the ancient genetic markers that define the Welsh people have not faded. They remain strong, woven into the DNA of modern Wales like threads of history hidden beneath the surface. One reason for this remarkable continuity is the enduring connection to the land itself. In rural areas, especially in the north and west, families have lived in the same regions for generations, their ancestry deeply rooted in the valleys, hills, and coastal plains. Studies show that even today, people in these areas carry genetic signatures that link them directly to Britain's earliest settlers, hunter-gatherers who arrived after the last ice age, Neolithic farmers, and the resilient communities that followed. Another powerful force preserving this legacy is the Welsh language. As one of the oldest living languages in Europe, Welsh isn't just a means of communication. It's a cultural anchor that has helped maintain distinct communities and, indirectly, the genetic heritage of the people who speak it. Language and identity are closely intertwined, and in Wales, this connection has played a role in preserving not just traditions, but the ancient bloodlines that define the nation's unique character. But the story of modern Welsh DNA isn't just about preservation, it's also about adaptation. While the core genetic markers remain, the people of Wales have embraced diversity and change, adding new layers to their identity without losing sight of their ancient roots. This dynamic blend of the old and the new reflects the true strength of Welsh heritage, the ability to honor the past while evolving for the future. Today, when you walk through the streets of Cardiff, hike the mountains of Snowdonia, or visit small villages tucked away in the countryside, you're not just seeing Wales, you're witnessing the living legacy of one of the oldest genetic lineages in Britain. It's a reminder that history isn't just something we read about in books. It's something we carry within us, written in our very DNA. Wales is more than just a country defined by its majestic landscapes, ancient castles, and lyrical language. It's a living, breathing testament to human history, one that stretches back thousands of years, etched not only in stone and song but in the very DNA of its people. The story of Welsh identity isn't confined to myths, legends, or the pages of history books. It's written in blood, passed down through generations, carrying the echoes of ancestors who walked these lands long before recorded history began. From the first hunter-gatherers who ventured into Britain after the last ice age, to the Neolithic farmers who brought new ways of life, to the resilient communities that weathered invasions without losing their roots, Wales has preserved a genetic legacy unlike any other in the British Isles. While empires rose and fell, while borders shifted and languages evolved, the core of what it means to be Welsh remained steadfast, protected not just by mountains and valleys, but by the strength of cultural and genetic continuity. This timeless identity isn't defined by any single era or event. It's the accumulation of countless stories, of migrations, survival, adaptation, and resilience. It's found in the striking connection to the Basque people, in the distinct differences between North and South Wales, in the myths that both cloud and reveal the truth, and in the quiet endurance of a people whose history lives within them. Every Welsh surname, every family story, every tradition carried forward is a thread in a tapestry woven over millennia. But perhaps the most extraordinary part of this story is that it's still unfolding. Welsh DNA isn't just a relic of the past, it's alive in the present, carried by millions of people around the world, whether they know it or not. Every heartbeat, every generation, is a continuation of an ancient lineage that has survived ice ages, migrations, conquests, and revolutions. So, when we talk about the untold story of Welsh DNA, We're not just uncovering the past, we're celebrating the incredible journey of humanity, seen through the lens of a small nation with a history that reaches back to the dawn of time. It's a story of connection, not just to the land of Wales but to the shared origins of all people. A story that reminds us that history isn't just something that happened, it's something we carry within us, in every cell, every heartbeat, and every generation.